Welcome back, everyone, to The Functional Code. We are excited to bring you guys today a new episode. We're going to be talking about Bulletproofing the Basketball Player 2.0. This is a core series where we break down one of our longer form episodes. So we did a huge podcast on this back in the day. But today we're just giving you guys the gems, the nuts, the bolts, all the little protocols, the nuggets of what we thought were the best parts of the episode. We were already getting into it before this podcast started, so we're going to bring to you guys a little bit of information here. But as always, I am Dr. Addy.
And I am Dr. Jace. So obviously you heard some skill work there. Stephen Curry, Kyrie Irving, it's a whole thing in itself. YouTube, other videos like what Doc said, love it. We're going to get into some other stuff on building up the actual structures specifically for the basketball player. And Doc has some awesome things to bring and talk to you on that side of things, especially with more information as we're gathering, we're learning. We're seeing patients, we're knowing what's working. We did a past podcast with Rob.
Yep.
Strongly suggest going back and looking at that in terms of certain training principles and protocols. But specifically, we're going to bring some of that and apply it to the basketball player, going at everything from the knees, ankles, Achilles, working in hips, groins, lower back, and then a couple of like AI stuff at the end. But a lot of this is going to be coming on building the tissue and bulletproofing the basketball player. So, Doc, let's start right at ankles, feet. And you were saying the Achilles tendon for basketball players is one of the most, it's up there in terms of one of the most injured areas for basketball
Commonly
player.
injured for sprains, tears, other areas. Issues could be plantar fasciitis with the feet. Obviously, over many years of playing, you're going to get breaking down of the feet. If you haven't Googled a picture of LeBron James's feet, you should do that. It definitely just paints a picture of how harsh 20 years in the NBA can be on the feet. But yeah, I think biggest things to think about, previous injury is equal to the number one predictor of future injury. And so you need to be able to rehabilitate as close to 100, if not 100%, when you do have an injury. Otherwise, you're going to be more prone to injury. And that's going to be something that a lot of athletes are as concerned about, which they should be, because again, they're just focused on getting back in the game, getting back in the season, and they're willing to push through it until they can't anymore. And then next thing you know, injury number 2 comes, and now they're pissed because they're out again for another 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer.
Yep.
And now we're hitting this recurring loop of injuries. And it just is going to decrease the frequency you're able to play and might even decrease how long you're in the sport, whether it's high school, college, or even in the pros. Definitely something you need to be thinking about. One other big stat was over 50% reduction in ALC tears came with neuromuscular training in female athletes in the sport.
Wow.
So what we find is when we can improve the signal to the joints, to the tissues through the neuromuscular pathways, that is what actually can improve our ability to know where we are in space, prevent injury, and limit injury to the areas that we're more prone to injuring. What we mean by neuromuscular training is eye tracking training, or being able to train more proprioception tissue work while we're doing advanced movements through controlled movements. Maybe there's weight, maybe there's not, but it's a lot more mobility and neuromuscular focused than just putting on weight or doing more overuse type of training.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this comes back to, are we building up the structure or are we resting?
Yeah.
And I know as a whole, especially NBA, they lean towards more rest days off, less games, versus building up this structure of the body. Because I look back in the day, like some of the old basketball players, like even Kobe, like he's playing almost every single day, every single game. So there's possibilities, like why did it change from back in the day to now? Yes, maybe there's more explosive movements or maybe higher technology, but it shouldn't change that much.
Yeah, I don't know if
it's weird.
They're just smarter about rest days, trying to limit wear and overuse. I'm not sure. I'd be curious to know why some people are using those tactics or not. And I know that a lot of the teams will get fined when they do rest certain players too often.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to limit the fines with how much rest that these players can get. But I do think there are plenty of ways to still increase the longevity of your joints and your body over a career using some of these kind of simple tactics that obviously we're going to talk about in a little bit. But you'd be surprised at what a crazy injury to someone can do to someone's career. We talk about like Derrick Rose when he tore his ACL and just the career he had versus what he could have had he not done something like that. Greg Oden was another one. I'm trying to think of some other athletes who have had those kinds of injuries. But obviously, that's not something you're ever looking for anyway. But if it is preventable, or at least our best chance at prevention, what are the things that we can do, and maybe what are the areas that we should be focusing on? So number one, ankles and feet. So I was talking to Doc before this. If there's anything that I would be focused on playing long-term past high school, it's going to be bulletproofing the Achilles. And the way that I would do that is, number one, isometric focus every day, doing some type of isometric work to your Achilles. What that's going to do is it's going to improve the tension strength of the Achilles itself. It's going to start to really lay down good tissue and improve the strength of it.
But with that too, going back to the intensities, detraining and retraining,
Yes.
stimulating, don't go highest isometric every single day.
Yep.
Go even lighter contractions, some days a little bit more, a lot. Just
Yeah, I love that. So
working that in.
ebb and flow,
Yes.
but still being able to address that area very often.
Yes.
Some other simple hacks you could do is a shockwave therapy in that area, which can build a lot of fibroblast proliferation, which can help, again, lay down more tissue. PRP can be helpful for like partial tears or improving the defects that you might have in the Achilles. And then anytime you aren't training heavily or are in season playing a lot of games, your focus should be neuromuscular signal, not so much calf raises and a lot more overuse. So you want maybe quick, short burst plyo jumps just to get it warmed up, maybe starting to do some proprioceptive work for the ankle, and just improving the neuromuscular kind of kinetic chain to that area is where I would focus on preventing that injury.
Yeah. Whether even if it's like you're loading your body, ankles, your body is tilted off to the side, maybe tilting your body against a wall, and then trying to squeeze or grip the ground or squeeze your calf, like either a quick twitch or slowly build up to a certain intensity and back down, and then change different directions, other side, forward, backwards, even add in like a rotational movement. So like when you're going up either to shoot a ball and landing, whether you're making a move and then looking to pass the ball or change directions, you're loading that area and those tissues, thus less risk for injury. But it's like Doc said, the communication brain top down will help for the prevention thereof.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Next would be the feet and the ankles.
Yeah.
It's tough because you're jumping and you're planting often in basketball. In terms of the pros, they play a lot more games than other sports too. They're talking like 82 games, where let's say we were compared to football would only be like 16 or 15.
Yeah.
You're having these differences in forces distributed on the feet themselves. But I would say building your foot flexors would be a great place to start, just helping to improve the strength of the feet. If you look at LeBron's foot, he's got a really wicked inverted first toe. So if that is something that often happens with basketball players, then toe spacers at night, just to improve the joint structures of the feet, would be something that I would recommend. I think also working on the arches strength to make sure that there's no collapse over time would be also something that I would recommend. And you can look up arch training, and there are maybe some other things that you can do from what people have done out there. Even just planting and then focusing on inverting and everting and just slowly rolling and just working both sides of the arch, maybe front and back also on the front arch. Those can all be really helpful. And then if we're talking just straight protection of the joint itself, controlled articular rotations, making sure that we still have great range of motion throughout the entirety of the ankle. And if you've already had past prior ankle injuries, making sure that you are looking at regaining the control of the ankle through resistance to make sure that we can start to improve the stability of those ligaments that were either injured or stretched. And that's done, again, isometric. Are there any other ways that you could also mention just bulletproofing that joint?
I think you said most of them quite well. The thing that's come in the back of my mind for some odd reason is this is not just like no pain, no gain. If you start having discomfort pain with training, don't push through. I think that's, and maybe it's the set population for most athletes not having the education, but that's what maybe their parents or other generations grew up with.
Yeah.
It's, you want to be smarter to help optimize yourself long term. So if you start having these like slight tweaks, rest yourself, improve the healing recovery rate more so before doubling down and pushing through.
Yeah.
Like there's a time and place, but that'd be something that I definitely don't want you guys to forget.
I would
through this
say
process.
for me, I love to use the red, yellow, green method. So
okay.
red would be over 7 out of 10. Stop doing it.
Love it.
Okay. 3 to 6 is your yellow. So you can do it, just modify it. Maybe less weight, less reps, just beyond, figure that out. Under 3, I'm not too concerned. You can still do it. Again, just be cautious if you start to slip into the yellow. That way you're still in control and you're not allowing fear to stop you from doing something. Because again, with how often obviously these athletes play, it's common to maybe have that 1 to 3 pain. If you're playing a lot and you're sore and you've been training, that's not something I'm too concerned about.
Yeah.
But now you start getting into that 3 to 6, you should mention that to your trainer, modify, and just keep an eye on it. Because if it starts to go back into the green, then that's a good sign. But if you're starting to get to that 5, 6, maybe 7, you're not doing your job. And now we're worrying about injury or even more severe injury.
Just playing devil's advocate a little bit, does sharp pain matter or change your perspective versus an achy, dull, tight, sore?
I would agree.
feel?
I think the type of pain is helpful to know, obviously, what's going on. We know that kind of pain can sometimes create, or I guess, explain more of a severe issue. So again, talk with your trainer, talk with your doctor if you have that resource. But what I would say is it's usually going to be quite uncomfortable with the sharpness. And I think knowing that and being aware of that is helpful. And if you have a high pain tolerance, again, now that's just exceptions, right? Because now we're getting into that. It was a 3 for me, but I got injured after. That's tough. This is more of just a guideline. But
Smart.
in my opinion, really what happens, and I've tracked this now over a long time, is they were closer to that 6, 7 when the injury did happen.
Okay.
They just either were lying or they weren't fully understanding what was going on. And again, this is more in patients that were in the 40s or 50s who just worked out once or twice a year and then wanted to get back and do it after a month or 2, and the next thing you know, their shoulder goes out, and I'm like, what was the pain at? That was pretty bad, but I pushed through it. There's the textbook example of it. But in a younger athlete who's probably healthier, we might have a better understanding of the pain tolerance, or maybe we don't. I don't know. But again, it's tough. It's tough to, if there's someone out there who can say, I know how to predict an injury, they're lying, because you just don't know sometimes.
So many factors you can't.
It's very
track.
difficult. It's very difficult to figure that out. So this is just off of what's the best guidelines that we can go through to make sure that if we had a chance to prevent it, did we have the chance to prevent it?
Yeah, so Doc, that makes a lot of sense for injury prevention, ankles, knees, feet, Achilles, knees.
Yes.
Jumper's knee, ACL. Obviously, basketball players are jumping up, coming down, absorbing the force.
Yep.
A lot of it comes to the knees, especially if they land in awkward positions.
Yep.
I know we talked previously with ACLs and how the buildup, not only the Achilles tendon, but would you also say something similar with the patellar tendon, or where the kneecap attaches above and below?
I would. And I would say if there's really healthy ways to supply a lot of neuromuscular signal to the knee when you're not in season or training, or excuse me, when you're in season and training versus more effortful, intense exercises for the knees is going to be more helpful. So what I mean by that is you're already jumping frequently when you're playing in season, and obviously when you're training. Maybe you're doing a lot of squats. Goal would be to provide more neurological stimulation to this area. And so ways you can do that would be like loaded isometric pistols, where you're down, you're loaded, and you're just isometrically holding that intensity for a certain period of time. And then maybe,
work,
and then maybe doing heavier intensity, less heavier intensity, even like subtle banded kicks, or somehow being able to do some recoil work. I think that's also helpful.
Yes.
Any way that we can start to increase the density of the tendons and tissues when we're also focusing on the wear and tear of the joint itself. So
Yes.
almost it's like we have a certain battery life in the joint, and in season that battery life probably goes down a lot quicker. How do we regain some battery life versus taking more battery life away to build? Because we're not quite thinking about that right now in season. All the building should have been being done in the off season.
Yes.
And so
Well stated.
if you feel like you're behind, could you increase the neurological signal to give you more performance? Most of the times it comes that way.
Yes.
We've had a lot of trainers talk about that, where you start focusing on mobility and understanding where your body is in space and upping the mental acuity and the neurological stimulation. That can transform into performance a whole heck of a lot more than just continuing to pound your bench press and your squat. And a lot of the times, athletes don't understand that. They think they got to be able to lift so much weight in order to jump higher and in order to perform. And not to say that isn't helpful in certain cases, but over time, the goal is to be able to play throughout the entirety of the season without as much injury. That's what's going to allow you to continue to play, ultimately get better, and not have to avoid injury if it does happen.
Dang. Well stated. Uno momento.
Yeah, no worries. Ooh.
Let's
Go out on us.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we'll stay. Yeah, Doc, in terms of, okay, let's say we want to build up like the patella tendon or even the hamstrings and some of the tissues around the knee, would there be any other ways that you'd think about potentially training some of that tissue specific wise?
Yeah, when you mentioned the knee over toe work, I think that does a great job. The kind of the front loading squats, sissy squats,
Yeah.
applying that kind of load to that anterior knee, playing around with that kind of movement, I think would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Anytime you have, you can train explosion with the flexion of the knee, extension of the knee, without as much force or like gravity against the joint would be helpful. If you're on your back and you're maybe kicking down into a band, or being able to maybe have knee extension up into a band, or you're able to load it isometrically without actually having to jump and to put weight on the joint. That could be a little bit more neurostimulatory than a wear or tear type of training.
Yes.
Other ways would just be noticing swelling and noticing patterns of wear, and then recovery, rest, giving it some time off. If you need to load it to help with pain, again, isometric's really great for pain anyway. But yeah, I would say another area too would be the IT bands. That's also really common too. So making sure that you're putting a good amount of force, tendon work into the IT bands at times if you're starting to have pain there. That can also be a good area to focus on. But ultimately, I think the winning method when it comes to training, or your in-season and your training, is focusing on how much rest can you do while also staying on top of your game.
Yep.
Because I do think that is why a lot of the NBA players are starting to rest more. You're seeing that as a pattern versus maybe back in the 70s and 80s. And I think it is just, that's what they're finding for longevity, is just giving more of these players off day, rest days. So during a time where they're facing a team that they don't feel is either competitive to them, they'll sit 2 or 3 of their star players to give them a day or 2 off. And you're seeing that pattern, and I do think it's making a difference.
Yes, it makes sense. Less injuries all around. Yeah, I think that's incredibly smart. Obviously, you want to follow the trends partially, but make sure that it's pertinent to your players, your person, your injuries, different from than everyone else, obviously.
Yeah.
I know there's one thing I want to add in with the knee. It would be going eccentric or shortened to long for the knee, especially when you're absorbing the force against weight, against gravity, or landing thereof. That puts a lot of strain on the hamstrings. Whether even if it's isometrics with your knee slightly bent, laying on your back, that'd be awesome. But that kind of bleeds in, that with the IT band bleeds into some of the stuff with the hips too, especially the change of direction, which I know stems from core to extremities. But a lot of this also deals with the ankles, knees, in addition to the lower back, hips. Are there certain things that you notice when working with basketball players or yourself for this area specifically?
Yeah, I would say not many look to focus on these areas. And so I think one thing we could add into this would be like posterior chain work.
Ooh, yes.
And I know you've done a little bit of that with your backwards treadmill work, and we've talked about that on past podcasts, but you have a very flexor, I shouldn't say flexor dominant, but anterior chain dominant sport like this, where a lot of it is through the quads and through the ankles and the feet. You don't focus too much on hip extension or even hamstring work.
Yeah.
And I think that when you start to train the posterior chain and you start to forget about those tissues, I think that's something that is going to only improve, or especially with speed and acceleration, if we're running quick to and from areas of the court, jumping, even forces, explosion forces when we're trying to get away. I do think that's an area that you should be also focusing on. So making sure that you're adding in posterior chain work, especially hips and hamstrings, not a bad way to train on your off days, or at least do some things like that.
Which makes a lot of sense. Does conditioning play a lot into basketball? Because obviously they're out there, they're going back and forth on a hard surface, so shin splints is a whole thing in itself. But I'm just thinking the cardiovascular, especially compared to the last podcast we did with soccer, football, how has that been for you in terms of training for the conditioning stand?
Yeah, I would say the better teams are the better conditioned, and the ones who don't focus as heavily on that tend to have worse competition, or not as good a competition. And so conditioning is a huge part of basketball because it is a very small court. There's no rest. You are up and down the court almost every 30 seconds, 15 to 30 seconds.
It's a lot.
And it's endurance, but it's also agility, acceleration, because you need to be able to explode down the court when needed. But also, you need to be able to pivot quickly and to laterally move quickly while you're tired. And so there's a lot of changes in rotation and movement when you're trying to guard people. And then it's how quickly can you change direction down the court to the fullest sprint possible, and then do that. Some people are on the court 40 minutes a game. So they're sprinting maybe 30 minutes of it. Now think about that.
It's a lot.
And so,
thank God for timeouts.
and that's the thing too. You obviously do have timeouts, halftime, quarters, all those things. But I think the way that you can get ahead in the less competitive areas of the sport, like high school, not so much college, but especially in high school, if you're just more conditioned, you already have a leg up, because there's not a lot of schools that do focus on conditioning as much as others. The better schools understand that. And in the off season, there's still conditioning outside of when they're in season. So if you can be a multi-sport athlete where you can focus on conditioning, maybe like a track athlete, so that you are able to continue to keep up your cardiovascular health and VO2 max outside of the season, is only going to benefit you.
So smart.
And we do know that multi-sport athletes have the lower on the end of injury, because they're just able to stay conditioned and keep their body attuned outside of their just one season sports.
Makes a lot of sense. I always love playing devil's advocate. Let's say someone doesn't want to play multiple sports. For me, I would then go to, okay, so if you want conditioning, go outside, run the grass, then less impact.
I would say,
bike,
you're going to have
treadmill.
You're going to have the ones who just want to focus on one sport, which is great. Your off season then should still incorporate conditioning.
Yes.
Maybe off or pickup games, so where you're still focusing on that, you're actually training what you're doing, and that's helpful too. While you're sprinting, you're doing maybe some sprints in the backyard, or you're focusing, we call them crushers, where you look at, if you're a basketball court, you have the free throw line, the half court line, and the other free throw line. So you go free throw back, half court back, other free throw back, and then you're just focusing on doing those time and time again. Yep, suicides, there you go, that's another name for it.
Either or.
Yep.
Dang.
And that style of conditioning is very helpful for basketball. Not only is it building up your cardiovascular health, but it's helping you at stopping going, and that's something that you're doing constantly on the court.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
God dang.
Now you add in skill work when you're really tired. That's where I think you can get better next level, is how can you train while you're gassed?
Yes.
Because a lot of the times when you're doing like warm-up shots, or you're practicing on your shots before a game, you're fully healthy. You're not tired, and you're just shooting all the shots. And that's what a lot of guys never trained So one thing that I found was helpful were up and down threes is what I call them. So I would sprint to one end, catch a ball, shoot the three, sprint to the other end, and I did that for 20 minutes. And so the first shots were fine,
Yes.
but you get 10 to 15 minutes into it, you're stopping, catching, and you're gassed, but can you still maintain a stable shot?
Yeah.
But training that way,
Damn.
super helpful. And then once you're gassed, shoot 50 free throws. And let's see if you can maintain, because in the end of the game, when you're gassed and you got to make that shot when you're gassed, that's how you should be training.
Yes.
It's not, I have all my endurance ready to go, and I'm going to shoot 50 free throws to start the day. Yeah. That's not when you should practice your free throws. You should practice your free throws when you're gassed, because that's more than likely when you're going to need to shoot them. So it's just making sure that we focus on training in that way, because I do think that's going to make a huge difference versus just waking up in the morning, heading out to the court, shooting 100 shots, and then maybe calling it a day. It's like you didn't tax yourself. All those shots came with you probably not out of breath. And yes, it's not that it's not helpful, it's just there are probably more efficient ways to truly train when needed. Yes. And then of course, you want to get into skill work of better ways to train and shoot and dribble, all that stuff. We could probably go on for that, but
Stephen Curry.
I would say yes. Stephen Curry is going to be the guy who I would mimic on how to, for skill handling. Shots would either be like Ray Allen or Stephen Curry too. He puts up some pretty crazy shots in some pretty crazy situations, but definitely still something you need to be focusing on too.
Love that.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much more to build up from there. I think all the principles that Doc brought up was incredibly important. I know there's other things that we can also talk on in terms of shoulders, wrists, in terms of just even the fluidity of the shot and or pass, I think is important.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you have on that front?
Not so much. I would just say that the best of the best understand recovery is their life. LeBron spends millions of dollars on his health every year, and I think if you were going to mimic anybody to try to keep in your sport as long as you can, focusing on what he does is probably going to be the biggest or most helpful, because he is truly quite the specimen to be as competitive and talented as he is throughout his almost 22-year career.
Yes.
I think it's something to say. I know people rag on him just because of the argument between who's better, MJ or him, but when you truly look at what he's done and for how long he's been doing it, there are not many athletes who have done something like that. And the level he's at still.
It's crazy.
And I can assure you, he's focusing on sleep. He's absolutely timing when he trains versus his off days and what he does on his rest days. And he keeps track of his body, I'm sure, using wearables, other types of scientific technology. I'm sure he's in tuned to that. And again, I'm sure that his training that he's doing is so specific to make sure that his body stays completely bulletproofed to try to prevent as much injury as possible. I know his trainer, we just looked up, he's got that book, Game Plan. I've never read it, but that would be, I think that would be a fair resource to use given how long LeBron has stayed in the game.
Yeah, depending on what's obviously in it, but it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Even going back to that and with some of the AI stuff, it's still early on. There's certain things that you can look into. Hawkin Dynamics, which monitors jumping, or Kinkson, which matters loading, tracking. But I think some of this, if you look at the recovery aspect, like Whoop is awesome, some of the others, Garmin, just monitoring your recovery, sleep, rest will play more dividends than you may think, especially for tissue healing of the body. So it's just something to keep track of from there. But
absolutely. Yeah.
Outside that, shoot.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for listening and watching. We hope you guys got some value from this. If you obviously enjoyed it, please share and subscribe, and we will see you guys on the next pod. You guys have a great day.
Disclaimer, the content provided in this health podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is solely at your own risk. The creators and hosts of this podcast are not responsible for any actions or decisions you may take based on the information presented.
Thanks for joining us on The Functional Code. For more evidence-based health insights, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the functional code. Until next time, stay well, stay informed, and embrace the science of living well.